And Shebonti.
You can start, ma'am.
Thank you. Good evening, all you wonderful book lovers, readers with a critical eye, and scholars, regular participants at this monthly party, and our very own Bengal Club Book Club members. I'm Dr. Julie Banerjee Mehta, curator, conceptualizer, anchor of the Bengal Club Book Club. And on behalf of the president, Mr. Kunal Sen, the chair of our Bengal Club Library Subcommittee, Dr. Shondeep Chatterjee, and my colleagues at our Library Subcommittee, it gives me enormous pleasure in welcoming our distinguished and much celebrated author, Ms. AYELET TSABARI, this evening. Her inventive, astonishingly honest, and compelling memoir, The Art of Leaving, is the book under the spotlight today. It's always a very special occasion to have the author of the book we are exploring with us. And on our 19th book discussion today, we are very grateful for the time that you have extended us so generously to be in conversation with the participants and myself. In addition to our wealth of members and usual cachet of scholars of our Bengal Club Book Club team, and our enthusiastic audience, we have a couple of very interesting and erudite responders who will share their perspectives. Both are Jewish, both India-born. Dr. Yael Silliman, I don't see her yet, but I think she will join. A Baghdadi Jew now resides in Kolkata. And as you see, renowned poet Zilka Joseph, who lives in Ann Arbor, Michigan, but is a Beni Israeli born in Calcutta. Look much forward to their participation a little later. I'd like to mention that AYELET TSABARI is no stranger to us. One of our subcommittee members, Nandini Khaitan, was most enthusiastic to hear that Ms. TSABARI was going to be in conversation with us today. The Bengal Club straddles some very interesting colonial and post-colonial history. It was founded in 1827, is the oldest social club of Asia, and one of its first presidents was Sir Charles Metcalfe. This was also the residence of Sir Thomas Babington Macaulay, when he was the law member of the Supreme Council between 1834 and 1838. Before we jump into the fray with Ms. TSABARI, as we do in our traditional way, we have a brief video clip you'll witness now, hopefully enjoy too, of our club, its celebrated library, which was created recently by the chair of the library subcommittee, renowned neurosurgeon, Dr. Shondeep Chatterjee, who is much more than just a cutting-edge medical specialist. Mr. Gurudash and Shebonti, should we play the short video now, please?
Welcome to the oldest social and business club in India, the Bengal Club. Set up in 1827 as a meeting place where people from the military, the judiciary, businessmen and professionals of the British Empire gathered together. Independence brought about a change in clientele, but not in character. Professionals, businessmen, people from the service sector, bureaucrats, and academics started rubbing shoulders in the corridors of this hallowed institution. Welcome to the library of the Bengal Club, an institution within an institution. A veritable collection of books, the like of which you're unlikely to find anywhere else in the city, and indeed in this country. Recordings by famous speakers who have spoken here in the library. and a collection of books on any subject that you may want to look for. Books by Nobel laureates, books by Bengal Club members, books on political science, philosophy, ethics and morality, food and drinks, sports and culture. Mention the subject and it's available here. There is also a small Wi-Fi corner where you can browse the internet in peace. They say there is no subject under the sun. If you're looking for a book, you will find it on these shelves of the Library of the Bengal. Envy the books, enjoy the collection, but above all, celebrate in the ambience of this wonderful library, the Library of the Bengal Club. Welcome to see the other famous individuals who have launched their books on this site. And recordings of that book launch are also available in this library. Welcome to the Library of the Bengal Club. On behalf of the Library Subcommittee, welcome to this program.
AYELET TSABARI was born in Israel to a large family of Yemeni descent. She is the author of the memoir in essays, The Art of Leaving, winner of the Canadian Jewish Literary Award for Memoir, finalist for the Writers' Trust Hilary Weston Prize and the Vine Awards, and Apple Books and Kirkus Review Best Book of 2019. Her first book, The Best Place on Earth, won the Sammy Rohr Prize for Jewish Literature and the Edward Lewis Wallant Award. It's longlisted to the Frank O'Connor International Short Story Award. The book was a New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice, a Kirkus Review Best Book of 2016, and has been published internationally. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, the Global Mail, Foreign Policy, the Forward, and the National Post. Has won a National Magazine Award and was shortlisted to CBC Short Story Prize. AYELET TSABARI teaches creative writing at the University of King's College, Masters of Fine Arts in Creative Nonfiction, and at Bar-Ilan University. It's easy to see why this memoir was a finalist for the Writers' Trust Hilary Weston Prize and the Vine Awards, and an Apple Books and Kirkus Review Best Book. Perhaps TSABARI's greatest attraction as a global storyteller is her absolute veracity. No holes barred, she has her reader in thrall with her art of fashioning her tellings with a refreshing turn of phrase. Like the burgeoning tribe of diasporic and post-colonial writers, whose mother tongue is not English, she employs the once colonizer's language to tell her stories in her own voice that are being read by hundreds of thousands of immigrants who live in English-speaking countries, which are their adopted homelands. Thus, the narrative is studded with unexpected gems: visual, audio, culinary, cerebral. And I quote, "The sky cracked open like an eggshell. I would wish that I was the one leaving because that would be better than being left behind. I know about death. Our country is haunted by its dead, weighed down by loss and remembrance. Food is a powerful signifier for retrieval and an arsenal against any wasteland that accosts Sabari. It is her mother's inimitable cake, that ugat shmarim, that is the panacea to combat the isolation she must face in distant, freezing Canada. The chapter in The Art of Living, Yemeni soup and other recipes, is the hallmark of how memories of her family and homeland, Israel, fuels this writer to assert her selfhood in the darkest moments of her life. The suturing together to her first home, even when she has left Israel time and time again, is electric. It's what many readers find irresistible in this memoir. And this is what I think appeals to a lot of our Indian readers. So let's begin at the beginning. You've written an astoundingly honest memoir and essays, The Art of Leaving, a winner of the Canadian Jewish Literary Award for memoir, and a firebrand writer that you are, with unwavering honesty and an indomitable spirit. You lost your father when you were 9 years old. As a reader, the grief that punctuated your life since this mammoth event was what resonated with me. Losing a great champion who actually inspired and cheered you since you were 5 years old to write a book is what comes across as the event that drove you to seek love, drove you to fill the huge hollow in your heart. Could you tell us something about this transforming grief into the writing of your lived experience?
Sure. Thank you so much for inviting me, for this really generous introduction and these kind words about the work. Yeah, it's interesting, you know, like I can't say that I necessarily knew what I was doing when I was writing about grief. Like I often say that I hate to bring it back. Like it sounds like it's all about my father. It's all about my dead father. It's because it is, you know, like this is definitely, like I say in my book, it's the fork in my life. It's the fork in the road, how my life split into what was and what could have been. And I just knew that I keep coming back to it. I keep, like, my writing keeps coming back to it. I didn't write, like, I think if you're a writer, and that's like, writing for therapy is a wonderful thing, and I recommend it for everyone, but that's not what I was doing. You know, as a writer and as a storyteller, I was concerned with story, and I was concerned with art and with making things beautiful and in translating lived experience into art. And as someone who was living in translation at the time, and still, it was an easy and something that made sense to me, you know, like that art of memoir, that art of memoir writing, of how to find a literary representation for a life experience. But after I completed the book, I suddenly felt this lift and this release that I had no idea was going to happen. Like, that was not my intention, you know? So yeah, it was a very interesting experience for me. And I mean, like, grief doesn't go away, it changes, it transforms, and that's just another stage of it. But there was a sense of, like, okay, you know, I'm not free of it, but there was a little lift that happened when the book ended. As far as the grief goes. So it was kind of an added bonus, they say.
Yeah, I think that is spot on. And I think if we are seeking some sort of a rationale, I think you've set the record straight for many of us. You've turned, as we go through the path that you've traversed, the reader probably feels that you've turned challenges into opportunities with a burgeoning global readership, And although English was not your first language, and you grew up schooling in Israel, your comfort and inventiveness with English is quite remarkable. Many of us are, post-colonials, and we know what it means to have been colonized. But those of us who are writers always want to push the envelope and ask the writer, could you tell us a little bit about this negotiating between languages? For instance,
oh my God, yeah.
Do you think or dream in English and then translate that into English, or do you think and dream in Hebrew and then translate that to English?
Yeah, I feel like this is an audience that would probably understand me more than most people. It's not, there's no easy answer to that. It's not one way or another. One night I may dream in English and another night I may dream in Hebrew. And probably most times it's a mix. Or, just like it's just like life. It's like I start talking to my daughter in one language and I complete the sentence in another language.
Yeah.
Like, this is the way we live in this house, It's not, it has no rule, no rhyme or reason, it seems,
Yeah.
And sometimes we don't even notice. Like, our neighbor just caught us the other day. She's like, oh, you speak English between you, like me and my daughter, and I said, and my daughter actually said, like, oh, we didn't notice. Like, we didn't, I don't know how that works. I definitely feel like my daughter is a true bilingual. She's always been bilingual. She was born into it. I feel like I'm a made bilingual. There's the level of comfort that I feel in both languages and discomfort that I feel in both languages, because it goes both ways, like, just by mastering one language that is not my mother tongue to a point that I can write in it and I can think and dream in it and not even notice it. That means that something had to give. And that means that my Hebrew receded a little bit. So instead of like being good at both, I sometimes feel like I'm failing at both, like I feel like I'm, it's neither of them is perfect. But that's okay, because I think, I don't think I need to be comfortable especially not in writing. I think about, those who read the book, and I guess most of you have, that there's a lot of risk taking that I used to do in my youth.
Indeed.
And like, right. And you said something about like finding challenges and turning them into opportunities. And in a sense, this is how I take risks now, in writing in a second language, that sense of being a little bit uncomfortable, being in disquiet when it comes to language. I think I thrive on that, and there's a lot of growth that happens from that fracture, from that disquiet. So for me, that works. I'm not seeking to reach some comfort level that makes me almost too comfortable. I fear that. I don't want that, that kind of energy. It's what keeps it alive. It's what keeps it challenging. It keeps it dynamic. For me.
And AYELET, you're in pretty good company when you say that, because the greatest writers today are writers of the diaspora, whether you're talking about Michael Ondaatje or you're talking about Salman Rushdie, and they all say that we are mongrels, and they celebrate that, and they say that we don't have to be perfect. So what you're saying again, I think connects us to the idea, which is my next question to you, finding your own voice. Now, we had a terrific writer who was pretty much the granddaddy of post-colonial writing in India. His name is Raja Rao, and he wrote a magnificent foreword to his first novel, which was called Kantapura. It was about a village when we were trying to seek our independence from the British. And he said, we should not write like the English, but we write in their language, and we must find our own voice, right?
Within that,
Yes, and even Derek Walcott says the same thing, that I learned your language, the colonizer's language, and I'm giving it right back to you in your language.
Yeah, so, I love that.
Yeah, so do you sort of feel that for you, you sort of, like a fish, in and out, you sort of swim through the...
Yeah, I love that question. I have a lot to say on that. Yeah. But I just have to say one anecdote that I heard about the writer Alexander Heyman, who also is an exophonic writer, who even more impressive, I would say, because he came into the United States not knowing any English, and now he writes books in English. It's kind of a remarkable person and writer. But he said once to his American wife, he gave her something to read, and she said, "Oh, you can't say that in English." And he said, "You can now." I just love that. Yeah, I when I first started writing in English, I felt very, I didn't find my voice. I was trying really hard to be something else. I thought that in order to be published in this literary climate, I had to do what they do. And I had to write in that voice, and I tried to emulate. I'm a good student, so I was, I learned the rules, and I acquired the techniques, and I tried to write in a way that would get me published. And I managed to produce these works that were sparkly and polished. I had no heart, had no soul. And what's worse is that I wasn't happy. I really started to dislike writing. It felt like I just wasn't enjoying it anymore. And it's interesting because, like, I went through such a journey with that. I had a really good teacher, author Camilla Gibb, and she recognized that. She said to me, like, the first time she said to me, like, I need more backstory here, I started to cry. And she said, "Are you crying because I asked you for more backstory?" And why was I crying? Is because I was told no backstory, no flashbacks, show not tell. I was told all these things that did not make any sense for my life and for what I was trying to do. First of all, I would like to tell. I come from a tradition of oral storytelling. Yes. And not to mention, I'm writing about a culture you don't know anything about, like, so that show not tell is not going to work, and the other thing is, like, no backstory or no flashbacks. A friend of mine, Gurjinder Basran, who's a Canadian writer, was of Indian descent. She said to me, like, but how can they ask us to not provide any backstory? We're immigrants. We come with backstory, So all of these things made no sense when you situated them within my context, within my life, and the stories that I was trying to tell. So Camilla was wonderful, because she said, no more writing Canadian literature and reading Canadian literature. She said, no more. That's it. We're going to start with a new reading list. You're going to read writers of the world. You're going to see the different things they can do. Transnational writers who write in more than one language, just to feel like there was room for my fiction in the world that was broadening and widening. And that's what I did. And I had a major breakthrough, and I just tossed all the guidelines and rules that I was told, and I was like, I'm going to do my own thing. If it's going to work, if they're going to like it, great. But there was a sense of self-betrayal and self-deceit in what I was doing, in the writing that I was producing before that. And that's when I really found my voice. And once I found that, it was such a joy. And writing became a joy again, like it used to be back before I felt that I needed to be Canadian and I needed to be English, you know what I mean? And I needed to do that thing they do. So yeah, so I'm glad you asked me that, because that's something that, you know, I wrote an entire essay about that experience because it you know, resonated so deeply with me.
Perfect. Mm-hmm. And I think the point that you make shows that factor you have in you, which all your readers, you know, sometimes are gobsmacked and astonished, is your courage to say who you are. And now that you tell us, to say it the way you want.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
You're welcome. Before I turn this over to a couple of our book club members who are really keen to shoot a couple of questions, and we have the time, sure. I have one last question for you. And this is a more emotional question. And this book struck me that it's the art of leaving is a unique confession of some sort, you know, of how important it is to shore up on your self-esteem, self-confidence by leaving a relationship before the other person has left you. Is it a way you think you felt you could be ahead of the game?
Yeah. Yeah, it was a way of protecting oneself. It felt like that was, you know, as if you could protect yourself from being hurt. It's a young person's unaware way of, you know, simplified way of like, if I go far away from my family and my loved ones, if I leave everyone, if I leave my country, if I leave my home, if I leave my family, then I'll be safe. Then I won't get hurt. Yeah. You know, like it's obviously not how it works, but it's almost a childlike, you know, perception of things, which makes sense because the loss happened as a child. So yeah, and it took quite a while, to be honest. I'm a bit of a late bloomer to kind of see that, you know, and recognize that pattern.
AYELET, who chose the title? Because often, as we know, it's the publisher or an editor who chooses the title, but it fits perfectly. How did that happen?
Oh, thank you. No, it's mine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's see. We'll take it with Vivek Krishna firing you the first question. Then we'll have Choitali, and then we will have Anju, and then we'll see if there is any more minutes. So keep your answers sharp and quick. Go ahead.
Okay.
Vivek?
Hi, Julie. I can hear you. Yeah. So the way I understand it, you want me to just ask the question first, and we'll talk about the book later.
Yeah. We will talk about the book, sure, later.
Yeah. Okay, so I did actually write down one question. I have several in my mind, but one question that I'd like to say. Growing up in the 60s, I had read about the Holocaust and authors like Leon Uris and Exodus and Mila 18, which came to define the Jewish-Israeli experience in my mind. I know of the Bene Israel people as well as the descendants of the Baghdadi Jewish diaspora in India, most of whom returned to Israel post-independence, and recently from Manipur and Mizoram, members of the Bene Manasseh, I'm not sure how that is pronounced, believed to be the descendants of the Manasseh tribe, one of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. It came as a bit of a shock reading of the discrimination within Israel in your book, despite the fact that the Mizrahi people were among the first to migrate back to Palestine in the mid-19th century. Has this mindset changed now in the 21st century in Israel?
Things have improved, but there's still a lot to be desired. Statistically, you know, you can just look at it statistically. For example, we've never had a prime minister that was not European descent, that was not Ashkenazi. I think we've had maybe one or two chief of staff in the army that were of Mizrahi descent, and only in the past 10 years, perhaps. The first prize of Israel for literature, for poetry, was awarded to Erez Biton, who was of Moroccan descent, in 2016. Right, 9% of the academic staff is of Mizrahi descent. So these are just numbers, and I think that they're helpful to understand. Yes, there are a lot of mixed intermarriages now. Yes, there's a lot of people that are, Mizrahi people that are rising into higher positions now. But I think the part that, a few things. The one thing I want to say is that the echoes are still there because of, the history, right? Where they placed people, for example. If they placed certain people in the center of the country and they placed others in the desert, that already kind of sets us up to success or failure, right? Who was given a land and who was given a small apartment in a development town. These are the kind of things that affect the younger generations and my generations still. And I think the thing that bothers me the most, even though things are improving, is the discourse in Israel is unlike the way it is maybe in Canada or in North America. People are way more blatantly, unapologetically racist. In conversations, like people allow themselves to say things that, as someone who lived in Canada, grew up here, but lived in Canada for 20 years, my mind explodes. And I'm like, oh my God, I cannot believe that was just uttered, by a celebrity or whatever. And it's still So things are improving. The younger generation is a lot more fighting it a lot more. So, there's reasons to hope, but there's also a lot to desire. So,
thank you very much. That's a great answer. Yeah.
Great. Choitali, quick question.
Yes, thank you. So glad to be able to talk to you, madam. I was just wanting to ask you that you have already said in your interviews that collective memory has shaped your identity. My question is, which shade of collective memory has helped to shape your identity, please?
That's a tough one, AYELET.
Yeah. There's so many layers to this, right?
Yes.
There's some of what I just expressed, growing up and knowing, feeling, even if it's not said out loud, feeling like you're not entirely, like you're marginalized, right? That's something that you just have. You feel it in your bones, even if you don't hear it being said. The trauma of the missing children in Israel, which is something I can't really get into too deeply, even though it did not happen in my family, because my family arrived to Israel a little sooner. It started happening in 48. My family arrived in 34. I sometimes, literally, like just the other day, I was talking to my editors. We started talking about this, and I cry. It's not my trauma, and yet I carry it. So that's another example of that. The singing is a big part of it too. The songs of the women in particular.
Yes.
It's another thing that I feel in my body. So yeah, a lot of very visceral experiences are the ones that come to mind first, I would say.
Thanks, AYELET.
Yeah.
Anju, do you have a question for AYELET?
Yes, I do have a question. First of all, thanks for being with us. And it's really been a very, very pleasurable and a very interesting exercise to be going through the book, and the way you juxtapose your metaphors and your images and your concepts. It's truly a pleasurable exercise. My question is very simple. It is the idea of detachment is the toughest to achieve. So is it based on any kind of a principle of renunciation or teachings of renunciation, or is it sheer escapism? I mean, just to safeguard your vulnerabilities, are you suggesting escapism? Or is it one of those very toughest renunciation exercises, that of detachment?
I don't think that it was that, I would have to say that it was more escapism. And it's not something, it was not that well thought of. The understanding of the reasoning for it is something that happened later, not at the time. Seeing how it may fit within some, like you said, some ideas that are beyond me and beyond the self. These are not things that really occurred to me until later on. At the time, it was, very much just wanting to run away. But I was young. I was in my teens and then in my 20s, and I was in pain. So it was when I was writing the book, I had some of the understanding and the reflection and being able to make sense of it in a way and that's why I wrote it. I don't think I would have written it otherwise, if there wasn't enough distance and enough time for me to kind of see it. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you so much. Yes.
Yeah.
AYELET, before we let you go, I'd like to ask you, looking at the book as your response, a very nuanced response to patriarchy. We come from societies which are very similar. The Jewish construct of the position of women is very similar to the way the Hindu right perceives the role of women. So, I see your book as a very vigorous and a rigorous, though nuanced reading of how you react to patriarchy. Would you agree?
Yeah, I love that you think that. I love that you think that. Absolutely. To me, it's very, very feminist book. And there was a lot of there was definitely, it felt subversive to me to just be who I was for a long time and wanting to not necessarily procreate and wanting to be that nomadic person that was like, I even write about that. I'm like, men have their hero's journey. Where's our hero's journey? Women are not allowed to leave. And motherhood, as I say, is the anti-leaving, right? So yeah, absolutely, it did feel, but because it was also such escapism, like you said before, I forgot the name already. I'm sorry. Anju. Yeah, because it was such escapism at the time, it also felt like that I was doing that almost in spite sometimes, I was so bent on, being that, of going against what I was meant to do, that sometimes it was maybe a little bit like a rebel without a cause,
Okay.
So it took maturity to come to that place where I'm like, okay, you can take this and you can take that, and you're allowed to be a mother and also want this and so on, and find your own way within it.
Right. I think maybe Sukanya, who's from the media. Sukanya, do you have a question?
I think Raka has a question as well.
Yes, I do.
Okay, so
Okay.
Raka, hang on there, hang on there. Sukanya, are you around?
Yes, hi.
Hi. Sukanya,
Um,
make it very quick because then there's Raka.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's fine. That's fine. We
I'll just
we can do that. Yeah.
turn on my video for this. Hi. Hi
Hi.
to everyone. Hi to
Hi,
Julie ma'am. Hi to AYELET ma'am.
Hi.
So I just had a question. Look, this is my first time I'm joining this, and I'm just going to ask you straight away about loss. You spoke about outrunning loss. Where do you stand on that? It's a very simple question.
Yeah, I think we kind of spoke of that a little bit earlier when Julie was asking about, feeling as if I could leave. If I leave first, I could protect myself. Obviously, we all know there is no art to leaving. There is no outrunning loss. And that's why I was saying that it comes from a very, almost a childlike perception of how do you manage this? It's such a, that kind of loss that is so big that it's the magnitude of it. What do you do? And I think I say it's a childlike view, but I think it's also just the grieving view. I think when we grieve, like, we become a little bit irrational.
Yeah.
And we can become childlike. So it's not necessarily just because I lost my father as a child, it's like my year of magical thinking. Joan Didion, obviously she knows that none of this makes sense, but at the time you're just, you do what works, even if it ultimately doesn't, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. You do what you have to do, and you do what you think works best at that time. Within the frame of rationality, you can corral together. Yeah. So Raka, we'll end with your question. So Raka is my ex-brilliant student, a master's student. So go for it, Raka.
Hello, Dr. AYELET.
Hi, I'm not a doctor, but hi.
Oh, okay, AYELET ma'am. So my question to you is very specific because I am a food studies enthusiast with literature, and my question to you is about the chapter of Yemeni soup. So while the smell of cake was recreated in your oven, was it an achievement for you to live up to your mother's shoes? Was it reclaiming your identity as you try to detach from the identity of the Friha in the first part of the book, and then you embrace the identity of being your mother's daughter, finally trying to recreate the recipes? So that is my question to you.
Yeah, it's a part of it is, like, I think finding a way to be my mother's daughter, not my mother, but my mother's daughter, like you said. I think that's a part of, like, understanding that within, a feminist identity, you can choose and you can pick and choose, right? And there were things that I wanted to take from my mom, and there's things that I admire about my mom. And again, that comes with maturity. So yeah, it's like it was a sense of accomplishment because, yeah, I'm trying to think about that, like that sense of accomplishment. I know that I felt it. I know that I felt also a sense of comfort, a great comfort, because it smelled like a place that was comforting, like my mom's kitchen. But there was also, like, I managed to do something that I felt, because I was so binary in my thoughts, that I could not, because I was something else. I was I was not like my mom. So therefore I was not able to be a good cook, and I was not able to make great food. And now I know that is not true. So yeah, that's kind of the journey that I had to go through. I guess I make things unnecessarily complicated. I thrive on challenges, like I said before. Yeah.
Thank you, AYELET. I will ask your indulgence. There's my husband Harish is here, and
Sure.
He wants to ask you the last question. He's a historian
Okay.
and
Sure.
knows the Middle East. So Harish, shoot and make it very quick.
Hi, Eyelet. I have a quick question, and that is, in Yemen, my studies of Middle Eastern history tell me that that the society there is controlled
Tribal.
by a dozen or so tribes, all very powerful. And how did you fit in, and how did your family fit in among them? Were you a part of them?
Yeah, so it's an interesting, it's kind of complicated, and it's a history that I'm learning, and I feel a little bit like I'm not the best person to answer it, but I'll answer to the best of my ability. Yes, Yemen is a tribal society. The Jews were considered dhimmi, which is a kind of protected second-class citizens in Yemen, as they were in the Arab world. But what that meant, because of this tribal society, is that they were adopted by certain members of the tribe, and they were their protectors. Like the tribe were protecting their Jews. It was there was a strange relationships of almost of ownership in a strange way. But in most cases, despite how bizarre that may sound, in most cases it worked quite well. It meant that, like I said, they protected them. They were not involved necessarily in their, in their whatever tribal wars were going on. They were not involved in that. They were not allowed to carry weapons in most places. So that was, so someone is. I'm hearing someone else. So yeah, they were in charge of the Jews, and they were connected they were very strongly tied.
Diku, if you're here, sorry, Diku, would you please go and mute yourself, because it's disturbing everyone.
Yeah, so they were there were very strong ties, and in their like I said, the protection that they were providing, the Jews were also, they had some obligations as well. But, as second-class citizens, like the dhimmis, they were meant to come to the sheikh's home once a year or so and do some work around there and so on. So yeah, it was kind of a complicated system that I can't get into as much as I would like to, because I've read all about it, but I have not retained all the information. So yeah, but that's kind of how it worked. They were not so much a part of the tribe, but they were sort of adjacent and had relationships with individuals within the tribe that had each a relationship with their Jews. If that makes sense. Yeah.
So is there any way that you have you gone back to them, to Yemen, to live there, or?
No, so Yemen, first of all, at the moment is obviously in a very bad shape, and you cannot go. No one should go right now. But even before that, Israelis with Israeli passports are not allowed in Yemen, so that was out of the question. Once I had a Canadian passport, I was really seriously considering that. But I would not do it without like very close accompany, some sort of, I don't know, I wouldn't do it on my own. I don't think it's a very safe, it's a very patriarchal society too. I don't think it's safe for a woman to travel alone, that's for sure. But yeah, I know at least one person that has gone to visit. He has an American passport and a photographer, a Yemeni Jew from my family. And he had gone back and visited. When he went back, there were still some Jews living in there. Now there are none, because last year, the Saudis basically, or the Yemeni government basically kicked the last of the Jews that were living there, and they're all now in Saudi Arabia. So that's it. It's
Thank
done,
you.
like it's an end of an era. There's no more Jews in Yemen at this point.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, AYELET. Thank you for your time, for your generosity, and for casting such light on so many subjects.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I had a blast,
Thank
and
you very much.
I can't wait to
Wonderful.
hear everything you have to say later when I come back from my other things that I have to
Yes,
do.
I will
So
send
thank you
I
so
will
much.
send you the recording.
Okay, great. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye, AYELET.
Bye. Okay, that's got us on the right page. All of us, I think, very excited. Was that feisty enough for you?
Wonderful.
Very, very, very,
Very good.
very fun. Very good indeed.
Yeah, very good.
Excellent. Okay, let's start as usual with our members first. 3-minute time limit, please remember, and then we'll open it up to the floor, and we have some wonderful participants today. Professor Choitali Moitro, will you do the honors of opening the floor, please?
Thank you so much, Julie, for arranging such a meeting. It was just wonderful listening to AYELET. I think also thanks to Nandini in this context. So the book is definitely about the Jewish survival, Jewish vitality, and also I thought restructuring the roles of women and men and understanding the importance of ethical opportunities. That's what I felt. But what attracted me the most was the traveler's aspect and the traveling self that we find in the memoir, which can be expressed as the traveler / vagrant / hobo / tramp. It can go on. And if you remember the words of Edward Said saying, this is travel from person to person and situation to situation. So let me end the quote there. I feel like saying that this memoir is also traveling within herself. So it shows travel within the self of the protagonist, the traveler, with the helplessness associated with fragmentation, the immigrant experience, her motherhood, gender issues addressed, and across all this, which takes her to a particular sense of who I am, to a question of who I am. A very important part is the death of a parent. I felt her father's death made her go for this wider self-search, which takes her to so many different geographies, regions, cultures, and so on. And after listening to the conversation between Julie and AYELET, I have developed the guts to say that there are certain points in the book. Word power is very, very, brilliant with her. But I have felt that apart from word power, as she herself said, I think it's not visceral, not guttural. It's just a wonderful hollow of self-search, which is getting lighted up little by little as she traverses from one place to the other.
Brilliant.
That's it.
Brilliant, Choitali, as usual, on point, comprehensive, and you give the entire picture and the segue to the next speaker, who is going to be, let's see, Sangeeta. Short and sweet, 3 minutes, please. Mrs. Sangeeta Kichlu.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Yeah, I don't think I'll need 3 minutes. I sort of very cursorily read through the book. I read the beginning in detail, and AYELET answered so many questions that I had in my mind. And the name of the book itself is so layered, The Art of Leaving. You know, there's so much of leaving out here because apart from the fact that she leaves her attachments, starting with her childhood boyfriends, and then she leaves various homes and chooses a nomadic life. As she said, it was an escapism, but I think she also left so many identities. And inside, not in a derogatory way, I think she was really a freeha, and not in a derogatory way, not in a vulgar way as it's supposed to be, but she was a free spirit. And I think that was, like a cannonball that was shot out by the death of her father. She had that in her, and the death of her father catapulted her into the freewheeling world. And I think the nomadic life she led kind of satiated that freewheeling spirit in her. So the other thing which was fantastic and very interesting is the Yemeni Jew customs, and the divide between the white Jews and the what do you call them? The Nazi Jews and the Sephardic Jews. That was very interesting. The level of racism and difference that still exists, according to her, which also propelled her into, writing this book. And her imagery, like the way she described the Yom Kippur festival, the cooking and the smells of cilantro and the soup, beautiful senses there. Really liked that. And all in all, I think it was a very wholesome book, loaded with meaning, loaded with, and I like that sentence which Julie quoted at the beginning, that leaving is easier than being left. And I think that is what kind of overrides her personality until she finds her root. And right through the book, there's no getting away from the fact that she's deeply a Yemeni Jewish. And it's nice that she's come back to where she belongs, because she's always kind of referring to that all the time, no matter where she is, whether she's in India or whether she's in Canada. So it's nice that she's come back to her anchor. Yeah, it was an excellent book and loved it.
Thank you so much, Sangeeta. Salient points brought out really well. So, Anju, would you like to go for your version of it? Anju Munshi is
Yes. Can you hear me?
Psychotherapist. Yes, psychotherapist. So I'm looking forward to that sort of insight. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I think there is an image of a wanderer that comes to my mind who wanders all over with a bag behind her back. And then at every given step, she collects all the experiences, her feelings, her emotions, whether they've been hurt or whether they've been sustained. She puts them all behind herself in a bag, and she feels the weight of it as she progresses further. Either she feels the weight or she feels light about it. It depends on what the traveler thinks like. Rediscovering her identity, I think, is the crux of the matter. And I think she repeatedly said that grief, she mentioned grief a couple of times. It's been a teacher, a navigator in her case, because grief, and she did say, when things are perfect and bright, I don't feel very comfortable, because there is a kind of, a kind of an inspiration that people do draw from grief. And, when adversities like overpower you. So grief has been a navigator, and it has helped her find herself, or maybe she thought that she would be able to find herself owing to the grief. Nostalgia, a very strong yearning for sights and smells, drives her forward. And all through, there is a very strong insecurity that prevails. And most of the time, she's safeguarding her vulnerabilities. Like she said, that before I get hurt, it's time for me to leave and not get hurt. So most of the times, it's a very defensive approach. And what prevails and what is very predominant in the entire book is the need to protect yourself, the need to hold yourself together before somebody hurts you and breaks you down. So I think that is very sensitively done, very, very sensibly handled. And I loved her metaphors and words and the expressions. I don't think there is enough time to write, to talk about all that. And I was very touched with her adulation for Ofra Hafsa. It was very overwhelming to see how she identifies herself with somebody who's as normal and as simple as Ofra, because she doesn't party, she's very simple, and she doesn't go on dates and things like that. That's the way it's been mentioned there. So probably in her, she senses betrayal in her case, and that is one thing which she wants to avoid getting into. That is one thing which makes her very, very protective about her own self. She doesn't want to get hurt. Ofra is predominant in her mind. So there's a long chapter which has been written about Ofra. I think overall a wonderful book. I enjoyed reading it. Thank you so much, Julie.
Thank you, Anju. You never disappoint. Wonderful. Anusuya, would you like to pop in and say a few words about the book?
Good evening, everyone. I joined in to the read much later than the pre-meet that you all had, because I had no information on the book. So I haven't finished reading the book quite as yet, but I've come towards the end, and my questions were answered by the author towards the end. And it was, it's a beautiful book, no doubt. But when I started with the reading, I had a tremendous feeling of discomfiture at the way she was just squandering her youth and her life away and hurting herself, self-sabotaging herself willingly, and exposing herself, not using wisdom. And as a parent of daughters, I felt such anguish that someone could not cherish herself enough to even protect herself in the various places that she put herself in vulnerability, especially with that Shelley's father, and various occasions when, maybe the mother in me was responding to the way she was allowing herself to get hurt. And all of that was really much of the emotion that she stirred up in me, till very much towards the end, when I realized that while she was fighting convention, she was fighting and being rebellious and wanting to do things which were not the norm. Eventually, it was when she set anchor, when she felt the need to have a child, it is then that she figured that so many things could have been done so differently. And that's when introspection seeped into her and she found home, the way the home that she was hunting for all her life. And then it's so, I was very happy to read the introspective passage where she writes, I was so young and short-sighted that I was oblivious to the repercussions these choices, or rather my refusal to make them, my debilitating indecisiveness might have on my life later. Leaving, I discovered, did not cure my displacement, but rather reinforced it. So she kept leaving. Yes, like Anju said, with a little bag on her, little bag behind her. But if you ask me, at 35, she was dragging a huge piece of baggage in wherever she was going, and it was not getting any lighter. And she started to resolve it only when she went home and started to relook at her life from a mature angle. So yes, I think much of the book talks about a person who has taken a huge time to grow up, because there are a lot of people who lose parents at an early age, but they don't punish themselves quite as much as she has punished herself. And that I felt was quite unnecessary, because she was a hugely gifted woman. And I think the world had missed out on the gifts growing to great fulfillment because of the neglect that she imposed upon her gifts for such a long time, her early youth till she was 35. I think the greatest benefit to her life and self-realization came only with the entry of Sean. And I think the part that she gets off the bus where she was abused by the teenagers and falls into his arms is a kind of closure for her vis-a-vis the pain of losing her father and eventually finding safe arms to fall in. That I felt was a turning point in her life from my interpretation. So that's what I want to say.
Brava, brava, wonderful. I'm glad that you were so out of the box. As it was an unexpected joy to hear you, and I think all of us learned something from you. Thank you so much. Thank you, right, Choitali?
Thank you. Yes, absolutely right.
Okay,
Absolutely.
Vivek, Mr. Vivek Krishna, our stalwart, great man. Go for it. Let's see what you have to say.
Thank you, Julie. Actually, a lot of what I've written has been spoken, but I will, I think, just touch on it. Like all of you,
Vivek, can you make it a little louder, please? Thank you.
A little louder. Is that better? Is that better, Julie? Okay. I found The Art of Leaving, like all of you, a very compelling read. An original voice so different from other memoirs I've read. And I start with a quote from E.C. Edugyan, I hope I have the correct pronunciation, which marks the third section of the memoir. I, who had lived so much of my life looking elsewhere, was slowly coming to acknowledge that not belonging also can be a kind of belonging. There are all sorts of nations on this earth. It is a lonelier citizenship perhaps, but a vast one. So the death of Violet's father, which encouraged her to become a writer at the age of 5 and promised to publish her first book. A heart condition takes him away by the time she is 9, but by then the urge to write was deeply ingrained in her. And coming full circle at the end of the memoir, she discovers a manuscript of poetry written by him and adds it to the growing Mizrahi literary tradition in Israel. So full marks. Starting from that sudden passing of her beloved father, which underpins her entire life, the format of the story is laid out in what reads like a series of essays, jumping from one formative period of her peripatetic life to another, as she restlessly moves back and forth across the globe, propelled in an attempt to come to terms with her own demons. Every time the doorbell rings, my baby brother's eyes will light up and then dim right down again when someone who isn't our father walks in. We come to know AYELET as a dark-skinned, rebellious young woman who is stubborn and argumentative, with a mind clearly her own. She is uncomfortable with her own lineage, which traces back to Yemen, and struggles for recognition in Israeli society, which holds up the ideal of the Ashkenazi diaspora of European descent. Life in Israel for all who live there is one of high anxiety and the constant threat of violence. A period of service in the army is a low point, despite the official position that this compulsory experience is a melting pot for young Israelis. Most Mizrahi ended up relegated to the worst posts. It is an interesting phenomenon, isn't it, that when one doesn't have an age-old caste system in place, human beings quickly adapt to one of their own making. AYELET clearly has a difficult time with commitment. For 20 years, these questions of self-identity loom large as she experiments with her sexuality, her ethnicity, lifestyle, and substance abuse. She is always restless and has perfected the art of leaving before she herself is abandoned by her friends and partners. As a roving 20-something, I enjoyed toying with the idea of home as if it was a fluid, negotiable term, a mental RV, a headspace. She writes beautifully, and it is with some incredulity that I read that for her, English was a foreign language, and she feels disengaged in the West because she does not think in English. And yet, here is how she sees the world around her. It's April and cool for the season. The breeze, a thin, silky scarf. The sky is the color of white linen that was accidentally laundered with a blue sock. And another, the sky is mucky and gray, an ashtray left on a rainy porch. And thirdly, everything was coated with the surreal haze that followed extended air travel, tinged with strangeness and fatigue, the inconceivability of being here and now. Just when I was beginning to tire of her living on the edge in the central half of the book, AYELET effortlessly pivots back to her birthplace in a suburb of Tel Aviv and comes to terms with her mother and herself, finding solace and deliverance in traditional food made in her mother's kitchen. She disappeared into the kitchen, became one with the appliances. Food replaced her words. Cooking became her currency. At the end, AYELET's mother decides to sell the home she raised her 6 children in, a home that his long deceased husband had built for his family. On his deathbed, she had promised her husband never to sell it. AYELET says, I hope that in the process of letting go, my mother could find space for forgiveness and absolve herself from the promises she couldn't keep. Home is collecting stories, writing them down and retelling them. And I remind myself, we get to keep our memories and our stories and take them with us wherever we go. Thank you.
Vivek, I like the way that you broke up the narrative and even the mood that she could capture with the description of the sky, I think showcases her insights as a writer. You know, she, again, I think it goes back to the question I always have for second language is English speakers. That makes like most of the world, Vivek, and how well there's one line, I was just thinking when you talked about the sky, there's one line where she says that her heart crumpled like a piece of paper. There is a certain je ne sais quoi in her, which is the stuff of a really good writer. And I also love the way that you related the fact that at times we are all driven when we are 17 or 18 or 19 to just go and check the world out. But something sort of draws us back from self-harm. But I think in her mind, as she told us in her interview, she had crossed that line many times and she didn't rationalize anymore. So I'm still trying to figure out a question that Anusuya posed, and I think Anju and Choitali and Sangeeta, how did she, and even Sukanya, I think from the media, how did that happen? I mean, self-preservation is an instinct that is so strong. That sort of was not a barrier for her to take that risk. Very interesting. So we have Dr. Paromita Mukherjee Malik on the list. Paromita, are you here? I don't see her here. All right. Then let me go to our wonderful crop of new members, guest members, and we've got Yael Silliman and we have Zilka Joseph. Zilka's been waiting very patiently for a very long time. So Yael, hi there. We'll have you after Zilka. Zilka is joining us from Ann Arbor. Zilka is actually a very proficient poet, if I remember correctly. I met her at many of the poetry events we have, internationally published, award-winning, authored 5 collections. The most recent one is truly a very moving collection called Our Beautiful Bones. Her work reflects her Indian and Bene Israeli roots and the Western culture that she lives in. Zilka teaches creative writing. She's a manuscript advisor and a mentor to writers in her community. Take it away, Zilka. Looking forward to listening to you.
Hello, everyone. So wonderful to be here. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
All right. Julie, thanks so much. It's just lovely to be embraced by all of you. I feel I'm back home in Kolkata, which I miss so much. Some of you know that I lost my parents, and after that I have not been able to be emotionally strong enough to return, but I hope to someday. Julie, quick correction. I was born in Mumbai because my family originally came from there, and I was very young when we moved to Kolkata, about 4 or 5 years old. And then when I was 6 years old, I got polio. So my upbringing, I was very sheltered in many ways. So the outside world was a very difficult place for me. So, but let's get back to the book. I was just so amazed to hear AYELET, and I resonated with so much of what she said, because in so many ways, my experience have been similar, not so much with, with the search for self as has happened for her, but it is a search for self in these different chapters of immigration, these different in-between worlds that we visit. So I have picked just a couple of specific things that I wanted to address, talk about, what resonated with me. Thank you for inviting me. I begin with a quotation from The Art of Losing by Elizabeth Bishop, a very powerful poem that made a great impact on me. And many of those themes run through most of my books. The art of losing isn't hard to master. So many things seem filled with the intent to be lost, that their loss is no disaster. Tsabari's brilliant memoir and essays is not for the faint-hearted. All presenters today have had great praise for this exceptionally gifted writer, and her book is a jewel indeed. I have so much to say, but to avoid redundancy, I will refer to just 2 specific things that moved me, in particular, as an Indian and as a Ben Israel woman, poet and educator, a lover of knowledge, and a free spirit who left India in her mid-30s for the USA. In her cleverly curated stories, I identified with many of her tragedies. I was particularly drawn to her rebelliousness and her anger at oppression and discrimination. I was riveted by the sections where she so unflinchingly portrays her time in the Israeli army and the details of horrific discrimination against Yemeni Jews, women in particular, and culture. I too have borne the brunt of grief. So I understand when she says, grief shakes the foundations of your home. It might also have had something to do with the exclusion of my culture from so many facets of Israeli life, and not seeing myself in literature and in media, and with being taught in school a partial history about the inception of Israel that painted us as mere extras. How deeply this resonated. She gives voice to all of us who come from Jewish cultures who are not Ashkenazi. I had heard horror stories from Jews who left India and settled in Israel. As Tsabari quotes, they were called savages. And so many communities, such as the Ethiopians, still face such struggles in Israel. These facts also rang true because as immigrants who began a new life in USA in our mid-30s with very little to our names, my husband and I experienced racism, microaggressions that happen to people like us all the time. Strange reactions from Ashkenazi Jews I met, disbelief and ignorance and condescension are quite common. I too am exhausted by the question, where are you from? No, where are you really from? Questions from people across the board, and I fight erasure, exclusion, and nepotism, even in the literary world. My newest book, In Our Beautiful Bones, is a pushback against this whole idea of colonization, English that is imposed on us and yet becomes our own language. I had about 3 sections to talk about, but I'm going to skip to the last one. Coming back to Elizabeth Bishop, I lost 2 cities, lovely ones, and vaster, some realms I owned, 2 rivers, a continent. I missed them, but it wasn't a disaster, says Bishop, and ends her poem with, the art of losing's not too hard to master, though it may look like it, write it like disaster. This book may be about leaving an escape from commitment and pain, but I have many homes, says Tsabari to her brother, And isn't that the truth? We leave, but we never forget. We leave again and again, and we carry our history and geography with us. And it makes us who we are, even if we are still searching for a particular home. In my own writing, I grapple with states of being, death and loss in between worlds. And as a humble editor who critiques books of all genres, I commend her for her masterfully crafted essays and the techniques she has used to create layer after layer of history in a way that makes it impossible almost to define home. In my poem, Oh Say Can You See, I say home is where the heart is. Yes, all of us broken ones. And do not hate our gods, I say. Do not throw us into camps and ghettos. Our children, do not smash your jackboots into us. And those are the truths Tsabari is telling with her powerful, fearless stories. What impresses me even more is that she does not stop on her essay on finding home with her wonderful husband and daughter, but she takes us on yet another odyssey to connect with ancestors, to face truths that are hidden or distorted, but must be confronted in order to truly know herself. Thank you so much for this opportunity, Julie. Wonderful to see you, Yael.
Hi, Silka. I've heard so much about you and lovely to meet you.
So long. I met you so long ago. I'm just happy
know.
to see you.
It's forever.
Silka, it's as if you were reciting the poetry that I hear you recite at our poetry gatherings at Srijan. So touching, evocative, and the pivotal issues of belonging neither here nor there. So where is home remains the abiding question. Wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us. I hope to see more of you at our book clubs. Thank you. So moving on to another very specially honored guest today, we have Yael Silliman, who resides in Kolkata. She was a couple of years senior, Yael, or maybe a year senior in Loreto. So the Loreto connection is very strong there. Yael was a tenured associate professor of women's studies at the University of Iowa, and then subsequently a program officer at the Human Rights Unit at the Ford Foundation in New York. Yael is a Baghdadi Jew from Kolkata. She has written extensively, including academic articles, features on her community, but the book about her father, The Man with Many Hats, and another book about the family, The Teak Almira, are the two books that resonated with me. So Yael, let's hear your response, please, to AYELET's book, The Art of Leaving. I'm sorry you missed the interview with her and all of us.
I'm so sorry, Julie. I was at a board meeting today and I had written the time wrong, and I had the when it ends rather than it begins. So really, I truly want to apologize. I just want to be very informal. I haven't prepared words as beautiful as Ilka has. I'm not a poet. But I wanted to say about the book, I'm sure you've talked about the discrimination and the challenges AYELET faced, not only being a Yemeni Jew, but also being a Jew who lost her father, who she was so close to all her life. And he left her at a very young age. And she was a rebel from the beginning. And her first rebelliousness was to actually rebel against the derogatory images that people painted of her community, and she tried to pose and be somebody else for a long period of time because that was her way of fighting discrimination, probably in a more teenage rebellious way. What I loved about this book especially is its fierce honesty, because she talked about her life, the good side, and sort of the side where she was really, really searching and took so many deep dives, you know, dives which most people like us in our more sort of straightforward worlds didn't take. But she was a relentless pursuer of experiences and to learn about the world for herself. What I loved about the book was, yes, I knew about the discrimination because I'm a Mizrahi Jew myself. We're Jews from the Middle East. The Baghdadis were more fortunate than the Yemenis and the Bene Israelis, whose very being Jewish was challenged in Israel. The Baghdadis were at least more from the Middle East and a little bit more familiar to Ashkenazi culture. So we didn't feel the same weight of oppression that Ayelet's community and other Jews who from Israel, from the Middle East actually faced. But what I loved was her resilience and how she was able to find her Yemenite identity by leaving Israel and finding herself very comfortable in Arab worlds in the US, about seeing her sisterhood or the way in which she felt so close to Jews, to Indians, to people like India, people who looked like her. She went beyond her Jewishness to find commonality with so many groups of people who, her closest friend was an Arab, several Arabs actually, who she became more like family to when she lived in Seattle. So those are the things that she found her identity outside of Israel, and then she went back to Israel to actually come to terms with her whole self. And I actually thought it was a journey of courage, where she's able to identify the discrimination, but also be able to embrace it as a mature woman and revel in her Mizrahi roots. And that was a really beautiful part of the book for me. So I think for readers, it's a wonderful ride. You never know quite where you're going next with Ayelet, because she takes so many risks. She's the quintessential risk taker. And I think everybody who reads this book will see worlds which they are familiar with, but not really familiar. So I would leave it at that, because Julie said I just have 3 minutes and there's only 4 minutes left.
Thank you so much, Yael. You put more of a spin on it than just a historian would. And I thank you for that. You bring so much of the self into it, and the way you look at Ayelet's experiences. True enough, she was one of the most brave and unique kind of courage that she had, faith in herself to take those risks. Thank you so much, Yael. Now we have a friend from Singapore, Mitali Chakraborty. She writes in Quest of Harmony. And in that spirit, she founded the now really famous Borderless Journal, an online forum that is archived in the Singapore National Library. And I always feel that Mitali's work is a quest to find stories of immigrants and their faith, their challenges, and how they face life. Mitali, take it away.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me over and introducing me to a wonderful book. And coming from the perspective of looking at the world as a one world, my quest is always with those who transcend borders, and especially immigrant stories. While The Art of Leaving is a Bildungsroman, a coming-of-age story, what makes it stand out is that it is a migrant story, encompassing the pain of not having a home. Though Ayelet has a home in Tel Aviv and her parents were born in Israel, they continue segregated, living with the Yemeni community of Jews. She weaves the history of her origin into the narrative. She writes, in Yemen, Jews were not permitted to carry weapons or ride horses, and their homes had to be shorter than their Muslim neighbors' homes. Girls in Yemen weren't allowed to study or pray, couldn't read or write, and were subject to the authority of men, their fathers, brothers, or husbands. In Yemen, she, that is Ayelet's grandmother, was an orphan in the times of the draconian orphans decree, one of the collective traumas that shaped Jewish Yemeni history, and lived in fear of being confiscated by the authorities and converted to Islam. That really sounds very frightening. So AYELET's grandparents arrived in Israel in 1935, while most of the other Jews migrated in 1949. She tells us 1,000 Yemeni immigrants arrived in planes on the famous Operation on the Wings of Eagles, which many people erroneously call Operation Magic Carpet, as it satisfies their exotic notions of Yemenis arriving from Arabia on flying rugs. It was not easy to survive in an atmosphere where they felt undervalued. AYELET writes, upon arriving in Israel, Yemeni Jews were regarded as savages with their plural wives and many children, their lack of table manners and superstitious beliefs in demons and spirits. Their traditions were undervalued and mocked. That everybody's been talking of. I heard similar strains from what is interesting is that I heard similar strains from a Ukrainian writer who I interviewed recently. She was very vocal about the way the Russians undervalued Ukrainian culture and treated it as inferior. Growing up against such a backdrop, young AYELET loses her father, hesitant to accept her Yemeni background, partly out of a feeling of inferiority. She struggles to come to terms with her loss well into her 20s. She confesses, leaving is the only thing I know how to do. Further, the ongoing conflicts in Tel Aviv make it tough for her to find footings, including the compulsory army service for women, on completing which, to de-stress, she backpacks through multiple countries in a haze of drugs and alcohol, a discordant and restless phase that exhausts with its repetitiveness, as Anasua Pal mentioned. So, I mean, I'm fully in agreement with her over that. But it was interesting to read about the army service because my kids go through it. And it was very interesting that women also have to go through it in Israel. That was something truly amazing. What makes the memoir outstanding and enchanting for me is the way in which AYELET has woven the history, the current situation in the Middle East, and her sense of oneness with the whole world as her home. She writes, in New York, people think I'm Indian, Persian, Spanish, Turkish, Moroccan, Lebanese, Brazilian, Italian. They speak to me in all kinds of languages. I enjoy being claimed by so many nationalities. This is the same experience we had in China when we were living there for 8 years. So it is truly amazing when they keep trying to guess and speak in all kinds of languages with you. Eventually, AYELET learns to embrace her own Yemeni identity and finds herself. The last chapter in the book is called Art of Staying. What holds AYELET is her own family, her partner and daughter. A mature AYELET captures the continuity of existence. The mountains had witnessed the lives of the people for centuries. They watched patterns evolving through generations, old roles taken over by new faces, new husbands replacing the dead, girls becoming mothers and mothers becoming grandmothers. Nothing ever changed, but rather shifted ever so slightly, like an ancient folk song played in a new key. There is a sense of calm continuity in these lines and wisdom when she writes, perhaps motherhood is a series of small abandonments in the same way that life is a series of goodbyes. We are raising our children to survive without us in the world. We are raising them to leave us, raising them to endure our own departure. Thank you.
You're a great writer, I know that, Mithali, but I think your skills to articulate your explication of the points that you've made pertaining to the art of leaving is something I'll take away today. Thank you so much, Mithali. Hope to see you again on the book club.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to have Professor Shutanuka Ghosh Roy with us. And she's an associate professor of English at the Tarokeshwar Degree College, which I believe is under Burdwan University. And she's a reviewer, she's a poet, and a great teacher. Shutanuka is also a published critical views on literature. So as an academic, she's paid her dues as well. Shutanuka, please, we'd love to hear your response to the art of leaving. Go right ahead.
Good evening, one and all. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here amongst the August gathering. And thank you, Bengal Club, and thank you, Julie, for giving me this opportunity to speak my mind and to celebrate AYELET's book. I would like to, look at this memoir as a voice of resistance. Right from her childhood, she has stood up to patriarchy, and she has called her own shots. She is unabashedly defiant and loves to live her life according to her own terms and choices. She has tried to break free from all kinds of patriarchal expectations. This inspires women like me and hundreds and thousands of women across the globe. And as a storyteller, I find her absolutely charming. She opens her heart to her readers, and along with her, we globetrot from Thailand to Goa to Israel, India, Tel Aviv, all places. And along with the journey, she uses food, which Julie has spoken, and some other have also spoken about, as a powerful tool, which is also reflected in a language, which is refreshing enough to pep up the spirits of a jaded soul. And, since we are running out of time, to conclude, I would like to say this is just like a typical masala Bollywood movie. The film directors should look forward to this book to make it into a great film. Thank you all.
Now that is an idea I would concur with. Make it into a film, really. It would be very exciting, especially for young people. I think there would be saleability. Excellent, Shutanuka. You obviously are in touch with your students. Wonderful. Talking about students, it's a great pleasure to call upon Mohini Pradhan, who was a student of mine, a very bright student of mine in the master's degree program at Loreto College about a year ago, I think. Mohini, if you're there, would just love to hear what you have to say. Often her marks spoke and proved that her insights were far greater than those years that she carried. Go on, Mohini.
So much, ma'am. Good evening to everybody. Thank you so much, ma'am, for introducing me to this book. It was a very personal journey as well, because I am in that same age frame where she was traveling, and considering I'm mostly at home, it felt the need to basically go out, and it just resonated with me so much, this thing of travel and living your life to the fullest. So I think people my age right now are not feeling that with the pandemic, but that it is what it is. So this book was an excellent journey of self-discovery on the part of the author, as we've all established over here. And she navigated through the world quite literally, and the cultures that she was a part of. So I particularly loved the part where she was called as Tabu, who is a prominent Hindi actress. And it was so nice to see that cultural reference over there, because Tabu is an excellent actress. So, but we see it's so she's brought the cultures of the world together in that book. Her scope is rather large when we actually dissect this book. So now the aspect that actually caught my attention was the episodic nature of the book. And I think that's crucial to the structure of the book, because without it, the book, she would not be able to encompass so many ideas and cultures and incidents into that one compact space that she presents us with. So and also it's made up of the different incidents that shape her into the person that she is, as well as the incidents that she chooses to share with us. Some are very deeply personal, as we all know, so which is also a characteristic of autobiographical writing. So she is working in accordance with the traditions that are involved with this sort of writing, as well as making it her own through the incidents that she is presenting in it. So there are incidents that are relating to conflicts and historical events that are a part of her life, as well as the stories of family members, both living and deceased, who have influenced her the most, which I found very particularly beautiful, because she's incorporated everybody in it. Now, the episodic style helps her to consolidate the memories and the aspects of her identity into the book, and this is particularly seen in the chapter that showcases the bond of family and love, and which we would all relate to because food helped in bringing the Yemeni Jewish culture to the world. But each of these dishes were associated with a memory that pays homage to her mother, who was an inspiration as well as a guide to learning how to cook these particular dishes, which are pretty complex to make as well, because I was Googling every time I was reading. So obviously it didn't look very easy to make, but it was, she mastered that with the help of her mother. And I think this is a sentiment that we would also uh, uh, relate to, because we all have our own journey with food and cooking. So through what she calls the kitchen as the gastronomic Switzerland, she also introduces the reader to the important part of her culture and the emotions which are associated with it. So we have experienced this because there are certain ingredients or dishes that even we relate to with memories. So this was something that I found myself relating to the most. Just like the aroma of the Hawaii spice that reminded her of her mother's kitchen, even though she was miles away in Canada. So another interesting aspect of the book was the representation of the identities of women through the women of a family. So all of them are beautiful and strong in their own right, and the readers have much to learn from them, as well as the author did when she herself became her mother. So one particular thing that I liked was the alternative perspective to her great grandmother, who was vilified by her family. Like, how could this particular mother leave and her twin daughters and move on with another person? But we do not see, where we see that there's an alternative perspective to that, that she needed to leave, or rather because her mother-in-law was not in favor of her, and she asked to keep these twin daughters back. So it just shows that, how we might actually have a or perspective on somebody, but that might not be the case in reality. So I felt that that was a great aspect to bring up in the book, and it also went in tandem with the tradition of the good mothers that she knew through her grandmother as well as her mother, and something which she highlights in the book as well. So through the first two parts, the author prepares the readers with the incidents of either leaving or being left, right from her father's death to her departures from different places that she visited. All are the ones that help the reader recognize that our life experiences make us who we are today, irrespective of our age. Because people think that, oh, you have to be more experienced in order to be more learned. But then even at a younger age also, you may have had a lot of experiences that shape you who you are. Also, and she also presents various facets of her life: her sense of loss at an early age, her travels, her personal struggles, the lives of her ancestors that she learned and researched about, her fears, and as well as her family unit. There was a special focus on her daughter and her fears regarding her daughter, and how whether she would be a good mother or not. So I felt that was deeply personal, that was to put in a book. And also, through this, we also made to realize that leaving is just not a physical departure. It can also imply a psychological perspective, as the author does leave her fears, her misconceptions, her personal trials, and her prejudices to embrace a life of love and fulfillment. So those are my thoughts on it. Thank you so much, ma'am, for the opportunity.
Mohini, I can always rely on you to give a bird's eye view and a telescopic view all at the same time. And you've done that wonderfully, brought the microcosm and the macrocosm to intersect, and we get a really good flavor of personal history intersecting with global history and global cultures. And of course, what you were saying brings to mind the idea of hybridity and how she negotiated with being hybrid in so many ways. Thank you, Mohini. Raka, we are waiting for a chance to listen to you. You've become a regular at our book club, so let's hear what you have to say. Go ahead.
Thank you again, ma'am. It was wonderful to listen to all the speakers, and it was wonderful to listen to Mohini after a long time, and she just pointed right at the topic I'm going to talk about, that is about the chapter Yemeni soup and other recipes. It's because I have been reading a lot of food studies, a lot of theory on food and culture, that this chapter resonated with me. And there are a few sections that I would like to point out, starting with the gastronomic Switzerland that she calls the kitchen space. And I think the entire chapter was about the progress of love, if I might say, with her relationship with her mother and her own Yemeni identity through the dishes she could not cook. The ability to not being able to be at par with her own mother in the kitchen, and the judgment that she faced from her own friends, I think describes a lot about the cultural associations and the preconceived notions that you should be able to cook your own mother's food, and that should be something that should come in by intuition, something that should come to you naturally. The same quote that she used, that the place we call home is actually an irrevocable condition. The food that she could not make and struggled to recreate, to gather some sense of her identity, of her Yemeni identity in the Canadian land, shows us home is also a condition which is imposed upon us by our histories. So the way she talks about how the Yemeni used to judge people when they used to eat with their when they used to ask for cutlery instead of eating with their hands, or the synonym of the word Yemeni woman to maids, and how she was proud of being able to clean properly. So the domestic space and how her mother inspired her and judged her and also guided her to become and be in the comfort zone while she was finally able to recreate her mother's recipe, I think speaks a lot about how she made peace with her relationship, her contested relationship with her mother after the loss of her father, which is after the absent father was there, she and the mother, spoke in the currency of the kitchen. She also learned to embrace her own Yemeni identity and her own lineage by recreating that smell, that aroma of home, or the feeling of an imaginary homeland in her Canadian kitchen. So that is my thoughts on this chapter and this lovely book.
All good wishes to you, Raka, for your PhD, and I hope you stick with that foodways idea for your doctoral work, because I think it's coming together. I think there was one point about food that occurred to me, and I'd love to hear your view very quickly before we hand the baton to Mr. Vinod Pillai to wrap it up for the day. And that is, Raka, she uses Yemeni food as an arsenal to fight the good fight in another homeland, in an adopted homeland like Canada, right? So food in a way becomes a kind of arms. Would you agree? Do you think?
It does. Because when she was, for instance, the part I think about the chicken livers,
yes,
when she mentions and her friend says that, when do you know it is ready? She's asking her friend, when do you know it is ready? She thinks by intuition. You don't know. How can you not know how to cook? And she makes her mother's cooking and the recreation her weapon to I think reinforce her identity.
Yes. Yes.
That is what you're saying, and that
Yes.
resonates throughout, because she actually, while she's writing, she uses a lot of metaphors. I think it reminds me of Charles Lamb's The Superannuated Man, where he grew into the desk.
Yes.
So I think Miss AYELET also grew into the kitchen and grew into that homeland that she was missing through food.
Yeah. So in a way, it's like Jhumpa Lahiri's Mrs. Sen.
Absolutely.
The boti in the kitchen. Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. Wonderful.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you, Raka. As usual, on point. So I don't think we have Nitya call here. I was looking forward to hearing her views. Nitya, are you here? No. So Vinod, the task falls upon you, my dear, as a financial expert, to put all these disparate views together and give us your spin on the book.
Good evening, Julie. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
I don't think I've really, looked at it very deeply because I was involved in some other things. but I have read through at least the first two parts. I've looked at it, and what struck me, of course, was, I mean, this has been spoken about, but what struck me was the fact that it's a great book, it's great writing, that of course. But the other thing that struck me was the person there. The person I found to be really unique. I mean, I was fascinated by the person, by AYELET as she's depicted in this writing. I felt that here's a person who seems to have been prepared for the life that she lived, because she has that sense of loss because she loses her father, and then the sense of marginalization. All these things played together to sort of propel her into a life where, she lives like a free bird, where she belongs everywhere and she belongs nowhere. So that kind of an experience, which is something that is not very easy. It can be said like that. I don't know how many people would be able to do that. And also, she doesn't have any barriers in her interaction with nature, with people, places. She seems to be totally open to experiencing, even courting danger in the process. There are many places where, like for instance, she had this problem of blacking out. And it's happened so many, she just mentions in passing that it kept happening in different places. But she went on and on with it. So so that's one part of the thing that's so very fascinating, that here's a person who's going around places and experiencing people and it's not a casual meeting, she's actually experiencing them. Also a very sensitive person who is very sensitive to colors, sounds, and smells, as is evident from the book. And then to take all this and to write about it with great honesty. I mean, it's not easy bearing your soul and telling it, with warts and all. At the same time, being objective. I think she's pretty objective. She's not trying to cover up anything or glorify herself. That is what I found really fascinating about this book. I think what I felt is that probably the life she's lived was meant to, make the writer she is. Because you need storytelling abilities, but you also need a lot of experiences. The kind of experiences she's gone through will make her a great writer. This must be just the beginning, because the kind of experiences that she's gone through, the range of people she's met, and the kind of exposure, very, very rich exposure. I mean, this may not be the kind of life many of us would want our children to lead. That's a different thing. But without being judgmental, if we just look at it, just as it was, then you think, here's a person who's very sharp, and I don't know how she could do it, in fact, to travel all over and go through all these experiences, because she seems to be just moving around, floating around so freely. So that's what I felt about the book. That's what struck me. As I said, I haven't really, I need to, finish the third part especially, which I haven't done. So Julie, that's all I think I would say at this stage.
Love that. It reminds me of the song Free Bird, Harish's favorite song. Remember? Who was the singer? Does anyone remember? Canadian man. Leonard Skinner. That's the guy. So yeah, absolutely spot on, Vinod. Thank you so much for jumping in your very busy schedule, everybody. And it's been an honor to have AYELET with us. As soon as the recording is available, I'll make sure I send them to you, send it to you. And one last word is those questions that were asked of her. I am so proud of you, because those are the questions that made her admit she had a blast. So thank you again, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
We'll catch up and we'll let you know about the next book within a couple of days. Take
Thank
good
you,
care.
ma'am.
Thank you, Gurudas.
Thank you.
Shibunti.
Bye-bye.
Raka Mohini, all of you, Vivek, Anju, Chaitali, Yael.
Julie.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you all.
Bye. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night,
Bye.
all.
Good night.
Good
Good
night.
night.